Welcome to Justice Conversation. This podcast series brings together people who discuss holistic justice from different perspectives.
Hi, my name is Filipos Haile Mikael, and I'm a resident of the area in California. My mother tongue language is Tigrinya. Most of my perspective I share on this project will come from the Tigrinya culture and the norms where I grew up. For our listeners' information, Tigrinya is Afro-Asiatic language family. It's commonly spoken in Eritrea and the northern Ethiopia Tigray region.
I'm Kim, and I'm from the United States. I started the Justice Conversation website to contribute to a shift in cultural understanding from punitive to relationship-centered justice.
We welcome others to join and share in our conversation.
In our last episode, we began by talking about how we live under many different justice systems through family, school, work, and society. And then, Filipos, you brought up how there's also a justice system within the self and reminded us of your understanding of justice as being an unlocking and opening up.
Yes, and that brought up your opening the door artwork. And we began talking about each of the pieces from the perspective of justice system within the self. The symbol in the artwork gives us a lot of complex ideas to reflect on. And so we decide to pause and continue talking about the rest of the work in part 2. Let's pick up where we left off and look the next artwork, this one with the glasses. What is the name?
This one is the collar.
The color. Good. Right now, I'm looking at the eyeglass in the hand. You know, sometimes I see justice as a matter of perspective, or more than perspective, but perception. Sometimes we need eyeglass to see.
Oh, yes.
You have able to see or to perceive what is truly there. You have to believe in it. You have to have the experience of it. You have to swim in it, like all the fishes are over here on the left.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I was just recalling what I was doing when I was making this piece. Do you see where the pen is in front of the arrow? This has to do with the expression over violence, the classic "the pen is mightier than the sword" statement. In this case, I had an arrow and not a sword, but in considering our internal justice system, we can think about how self-expression is stronger than a weapon for attack or defense. Developing your creative capacity will bring a more just outcome than using a defense that causes harm to others.
The next thing that I see in this picture is the role of technology in the process of securing justice within. The thing in his hand is an iPad or a phone.
It's a phone.
The smartphone represents the technology. Where I see a phone, I ask myself a question about technology helping me to understand justice within. Technology is a distraction from doing the necessary justice work. So is this a question I want listeners to ask too? What is the use of technology for our inner justice work?
That's a really good question. When I put the phone in the hand, I was thinking of someone being called in a spiritual way. I think it could also mean being called to an action or to the exploration of the self or the exploration of justice. But also there's the call for help. On the phone, the time is 9/11, which brings up a call in an emergency, the unfolding of a traumatic event, as well as the historical September 11th attacks in the United States. Also in this piece is a bell down here in the corner, which is another way of calling people together. A call together can be about community. I think your interpretation of the technology as a distraction is quite valid, though. It doesn't matter if I thought of it as I created the work, because if the art doesn't carry other interpretations for other people, then it isn't alive.
Yes, that's how I understand too. And I see the fish swimming upward, Fish are generative, meaning they related to the process of evolution. They suggest to me an evolutionary way of understanding justice. For example, in our international courts today, slavery is clear violation of human rights. But at one point, much of humanity used to allow slavery, as well as all sorts of other things that we now think of as crime. We are evolving in many aspects of humanity. We still have injustice, but we are developing into better way of living, and it gives me hope. Those fishes going upward are us. We are coming up to, as they say, a perfect union, a perfect justice. It gives me hope.
That's a very interesting interpretation of the fish. I also bring my understanding as a Catholic artist to my work. When I began to think of this piece as the caller, I began to associate it with Christ. And so there are other symbols here where Christ is represented. So you have the fish, you have the bread, and there's the water. We say Christ is the living water. At first, when I laid all the imagery out on this picture, but hadn't yet glued anything down, I realized I had been thinking of Christ and used all positive imagery. I had also made another piece that we'll look at soon called The Driver, which was made with all negative imagery as the counter to Christ. I stopped myself and said, no, this is not what I meant to work on with this series. This is about things that each of us carry in ourselves that we repress, the sacred and the profane, that must be worked within each person. So then I moved things around to make sure that I balanced out the imagery more. But symbols of Christ still remain in this piece. I can also comment on the bread and the water as basic life-giving substances. These are things we can't live without.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'd also like to talk about the bell, but let's go to the next one where he has the bell in his hand.
Okay, this is the bell ringer.
Yes, I see the bell as the voice, similar to the way you said about the call for help. But the way I see is that often we don't listen to our voice within. Let's say we go to school, we hear the bell ringing, and we go inside or we change classes or respond to whatever the bell is calling for. But what do we do when the bell within us rings? Do we hear our own voices? Before we ask somebody to listen to our voice, do we listen to it ourselves? Usually, a struggle against injustice starts by listening to the voice within, and then we can extend that listening to others.
Yeah, it can be hard to pay attention to our own voice sometimes when our inner voice is quiet or when it's saying something hard to follow. When I worked on this figure, I wanted to express an inquisitive person. He's holding a hinge in the other hand, and the hinge is a thing that allows something to turn or to swing or to move. The hinge can mean figuring out a different way of looking at something, how a situation turns. Thinking of how a hinge is used on a door, it can mean understanding how to see the other side of something or how to pass through a threshold. Then there's the light bulb within his torso, and light bulbs make me think of ideas. There's also the maple seeds, like the seeds of ideas, and the keys, which can be the keys to knowledge or understanding. I see this as a character engaged in exploration.
Yeah, exploration?
I think exploration is really important. We need to have openness to explore things. Earlier, when we talked about the controller image and what it meant that she was holding the knife, if you don't let yourself explore, it's like when you get an idea about something and you say, oh no, I can't have that idea. That's a wrong idea. It's like you take that knife and attack the idea down, right? Because you think you're not supposed to have that idea. Then, well, you're killing your creativity. You're killing any sense of being able to explore. When you can put that knife down and let yourself move freely within yourself, you can begin to truly explore. That allows creativity to be expressed in you in whatever way it's meant to come through you. For example, exploration and creativity might come out as art. For another person, it might be math or science. For another person, it might be how to build a city or how to lead their classroom. But it's all relating to creativity. You bring out your most creative self when you put that knife down.
Yeah, in this case, the justice conversation is also about the possibility of creativity and exploration. It sustains us to move forward and upward. Are we ready to move to the next one?
Sure, this is Mrs. Stone.
Okay, Miss Stone, what is the explanation behind this one?
You go first.
Miss Stone raises a question for me. I don't know if I have much explanation. Are we becoming stone? A question mark. That was one question I had. Do you have answers?
This is one of the harder ones for me to talk about. She's named for the stone that's in her hand. I can see your suggestion about becoming stone, that it can represent the hardness we might have towards others. There can also be stability in stone, so it can be seen as a positive element too. When I made this piece, I was working with a spiritual experience I'd had, and so I'm going to bypass a lot of why these images were chosen. But as we're talking about symbols relating to justice right now, I think the stone can represent some interesting things. When we talk about somebody being hardened, we're speaking about indifference that leads to injustice. Hardening ourselves allows atrocities to take place on a daily basis. Why is it that people are so indifferent? Why are we hardened? Another way of looking at the stone might be to have some stability, which can actually allow people to open themselves to what they're seeing. Maybe instead of becoming hardened, becoming stone, someone can touch or hold that stone to stay stable, to be brave in the face of what we witness. We have an expression that someone is my rock, meaning they're my stability. Another thing I'm just noticing, we might say someone has a heart of stone. This stone is somewhat heart-shaped, like in an anatomical sense. Let's say her stone heart is in her hand. Then in the place in her chest where the heart should be is a chrysanthemum that's being pierced with an arrow. Perhaps this gives Mrs. Stone a new perspective.
This gives me some more interpretations. I'm glad to talk about this. And in addition to what you are saying, I'm also seeing that she is sitting in lotus position, like a meditation. Is that right?
Well, she's not quite sitting in a lotus position. One leg is behind her and one leg is in front of her.
For me, I thought this as a lotus sitting position. I like things that way.
That's good. If you have your own way of looking at it, it keeps the art alive.
Okay, good. Now let's talk as the next one.
This one's called the groomer. I wonder sometimes if I have named it well, because the word can have more negative connotations than I intended. It's a term used for grooming a target for sexual assault. But while these pieces do address some pretty intense darkness, I didn't really want this figure to be seen as absolutely being that dark. I called her the groomer because she held a comb in her hand. And someone can be groomed in many ways. You can be groomed to take over your parents' business or to be the successor of some organization. Parents groom their children for adulthood in whatever way we think is needed. But I want to stop talking for a bit and get your interpretations of this first.
Yeah. For me, a groomer is related to imitation, like a child raised to imitate the parent. So I don't see it is in a negative way. I see it in a foundational way. People should ask, what image am I being groomed for? The groomer is an invitation. It calls us to open up and see what we are invited to imitate. The three Abrahamic religions, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, all have a belief that we are created in the image of divine. As I look at this from a Christian perspective, I'm thinking about having within ourselves an image of divine justice, and that we need to open to that image. So it leads me to a question: am I up to the image? Am I open to that grooming?
I have something to say about the hammer in her hand, but I want to hear what you have to say about it first.
I don't have anything good to say about it. The hammer is used to shut me up. In fact, it is antithesis of opening up. That is how I see the hammer. But to give some small benefit of the doubt, a hammer could be used as a carpentry tool to making something like table or chair. In a society, a hammer might be tool for building some sort of structure. Once it being built, I don't see the hammers anymore, but I use a structure. I see that as some good thing. In court settings, the hammer could be used to provide structure, but we shouldn't take the court setting as the end in itself, which we often do.
The hammer in this particular picture isn't a hammer for construction. It is a hammer for the courtroom held by the judge. Somebody could look at it and think it's about justice, right? When I was drawing this, I was having a terrible time. This was so difficult to draw because it's so symmetrical. The handle is perfectly turned. All of the symmetry is curved. The surface is highly lacquered. Every line must be perfectly balanced and in perspective. I'm used to drawing organic things like plants and animals, and I make these drawings with fine lines with solid black India ink on the paper with no pencil underdrawing. But on this hammer, if my hand wavered at all, or if I got the balance slightly wrong, the whole thing looked off. As I was having such a very hard time drawing this, I was reflecting on what we expect of people in our state-run justice systems. We expect them to be a little like this hammer that we hold. The law can be very rigid, like this hammer is rigid. The court asks, did the person do it, and what consequences required? The court often doesn't look at what needs to happen in order for someone to change or to heal or to have accountability for their actions, nor does it look at what a victim needs for healing and closure, nor what changes must take place in our culture in order to prevent this harm from continuing to happen. These are very human things, and none of them is precisely turned, precisely balanced and symmetrical. None of them is rigid. Real justice must take on a human shape, but our courts are associated with this hammer. It doesn't represent justice. It represents condemnation. It condemns all the parts of you that are not precisely turned, balanced, or defined in the rigid way that is considered permissible by the court.
Wow. So to add to your point, it is instead of court hammer of judgment, there could be a flower as token piece, such as is used in a restorative justice. A flower is a sign of beauty. I wish our courts would come to learn to see the beauty in each human. The flower in our Justice Conversation website logo symbolizes relationship, inclusion, and finally opening up. So the alternative of the court hammer is a flower. What do you think?
I can picture our justice process changing from the layout of courtrooms that we have now to a circular layout based on restorative justice circles, and where instead of a judge, we have a facilitator and all the stakeholders are present. It does seem a bit like a flower structure, like this rose that's also in the piece. It can seem with the rose that the petals are continually opening. The more you go into the situation of harm that occurred, the more you find and the more potential for healing. But I'm also seeing in this piece a bit of caution here. I didn't put this in intentionally, but here it is. I see there is another flower that's near the rose. It looks like Queen Anne's lace or wild parsnip, but the leaves reveal that it's actually poison. It's hemlock. It's like a natural poison hidden within the beauty. What does that have to do with justice? It might be that we're kind of a mess. Sometimes we think that we're doing something positive and we're really not. We're really harming somebody. And so we have to be careful. But these are things that can be examined within ourselves and also with each other.
Great. Should go to the next one.
This is the examiner.
So when we examine ourselves, it's of course the work of justice, but under the knee of the examiner is the whip. Justice is the work of loving and knowing ourselves, and in the process, we shouldn't beat ourselves. Also, examiner, it should not mean like when they do an interrogation on the jail and they whip you to tell the truth, to demand to know what's going on. That is not justice. Justice has to be when you sit within your individual self and be kind and love yourself.
In this piece, I had a medical professional in mind. You'll notice the snake is wrapped around the arrow. It's like the medical symbol of the snake with the staff. I was using the objects that I had already drawn and printed in order to make it into a medical symbol. With regards to the whip, I was thinking that if you are in the medical profession in our country, that's a very driven occupation, right? You have a lot of schooling to go through. Residencies are grueling. The work you do once you're in regular practice is demanding. I made these pieces before the coronavirus epidemic, but certainly what's come since then has been extremely grueling for medical and health professionals. That whip was there to speak to the way people in this profession are expected to be driven. In his upper hand is the egg, and I've used the egg in a number of pieces to represent truth.
Truth? Wow, how?
That's a good question. I guess it's something about understanding. The egg is something that is hard to understand. Looking at it, one might wonder, how on earth does that turn into a creature? We might try to study and understand that through science or maybe through faith. How does life happen? Examining the egg, one might be wondering, how is this life working? What is really happening in a given situation? What is the hidden thing going on beneath the surface? What will this egg become? You can examine the egg, how life works, how truth unfolds from so many different perspectives: philosophical, religious, literary, sociological, psychological, and also relational. In other words, you can look at the egg from a perspective of someone seeking truth for the sake of justice. Down here, by his leg, is an egg that's cracked open, and the baby bird in it has died. In the whole egg is possibility. Maybe you don't know what it will become or how it will become, and you're trying to understand it. In order for it to become its full potential, it needs to be cared for. But then it can also be violated. It can die.
Okay. Wow. That's really scary and challenging. So you are saying that in the process of getting truth and justice, there is also the possibility that we might die? Seeking justice is not always resulting in a fairness. It can take our life.
Well, yes, I'm afraid that it's what I witness. And I suppose this offers a transition into the next piece, which is the gunslinger.
The way I see it about the gunslinger, by violence there is nothing to open up. Along with the gun in her hand, there is the card that she is holding in her other hand. I see that for her, violence is the game of the day, or the play of the day to try to make justice. She should watch out, and we should too.
I have the gun in her hand as a symbol of explosiveness or anger that's present in a lot of people. You might not be going around thinking you're a violent person, and other people might not think of you as a violent person either. But a lot of people still carry quite a lot of anger around with them, and it's ready to ignite unexpectedly, causing a lot of problems. Most of these problems won't put you in the criminal system, but they're still going to cause harm to those around you and yourself. I also have her associated with black and white thinking. The card, the dominoes, the barcode are black and white. There's a sense of judgment here. Someone is right or wrong, good or evil. And so we've also got the hammer coming down on the rock, like the courtroom with the hammer of condemnation. We've got the control issues going on here too, with the remote control, as well as the addictions, the pills and cigarettes. I see this person as somebody who has suffered a lot of trauma and is pretty damaged. But she's resilient. She has that salt within her. It preserves her and gives her a certain flavor, a salty personality. It's part of her trying to survive that has led to the explosiveness, the black and white thinking, the addiction. This is a key understanding in restorative justice work, to realize how often harm someone commits is due to past trauma and the ways the person is trying to survive that.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I like the SALT idea that gives the perspective of preservation. And again, when you carry the gun, the sense of justice is lost. Violence is not the way of justice.
There are some other positive symbols here. There's the faithfulness in the ring, which, has to do with loyalty. I think I see this person as somebody who really values loyalty. There's the saffron flower here. Saffron is very precious. And there are things that this person holds as very precious, very special, and they want to protect them.
Next one is holding the starfish.
This is the stargazer.
Oh, so that's stargazer. I see in this that justice needs spaciousness. We need to be able to have the imaginative capacity to see the work of justice in order to bring justice toward us for our own future. Other than that, I want to hear from your perspective.
Okay. In this piece, I have the nature of the poet, writer, or artist in mind. Where he's gazing at the starfish, I'm thinking of someone who has their mind focused on something so beautiful that you can see, and maybe others aren't even looking. But that beautiful vision can also be threatening because it makes it hard to connect with those who don't see it. It makes it hard to just be in this world where what you can see in your mind and in your heart doesn't exist out there. The threat posed by that tension is represented by the noose, which is in his hand with the starfish.
Wow, that's interesting.
So in that vein, this figure also has the egg representing truth, the dove representing spirit and peace. In the black iris is a sense of blooming in a deep, rich color. The closed spiral of the fern is unfurling, and the bud is ready to open and the seeds to grow and spread. But then this figure also has the knife representing a tendency to attack, maybe the self or the ideas or the work. There's symbols representing addictions, and there's the hemlock, the poison.
Okay. You challenged me. This invites me to do more meditating about many things. Sometimes our silence helps us more than we thought in the work of justice. So going to the next one.
This is the driver, which I referred to before. This is kind of a companion to the caller. Even though I tried to separate them, they still seem to me to be a pair.
The driver brings up a question for me of what drives us, such as when we are driven by profession or by seeking for justice, wherever drives us in our life. There is a lot of drive within ourselves, in each individual person. The driver shouldn't take away the justice within ourselves. Let's say I have a stressful profession or I'm seeking justice. Thus, occupations shouldn't drive us crazy. They shouldn't kill the justice toward ourselves, like taking us to the point of burning out. Especially, I see this in many activists. They get burnout, they get frustrated. So this piece, it reminds me to watch out what your driver doing. Is doing justice within you or is taking justice out of you? Watch out the driver.
I think you're right on with what this is about for me. I'll just add something that I read in the writings of C.J. Jung. He said in his Memories, Dreams, Reflections memoir that he felt he had always had a daemon, D-A-E-M-O-N, which is related to the word demon but does not refer to something inherently evil. It comes from an ancient Greek concept of a spirit that compels you forward to work towards a certain fate or destination. Jung felt that in his work he was driven, such as by a daemon. It kept pushing him on to get the writing out, to keep considering his experiences, and to keep trying to figure out what they meant, and to keep talking to others about it. I feel like I can relate to that sense of being driven by the daemon. I'm somebody who tends to work a lot on a lot of different things, and I get carried away with many ideas. I'm often trying to bring many into play at once, and so I ask, to what extent is that a positive thing or a negative thing? Maybe looking at it in terms of the internal justice system can help balance that and can give someone some ability to check the driver, to stop it at times. Maybe it's not possible to stop it, but maybe one can slow it down or get it to steer things a little differently when it's creating imbalances or harm.
Insightful. I like the perspective of Carl Jung understanding of demon. I would like to hear more about it. So the next one.
Okay, here we have Miss Mouse. She's kind of like Mrs. Stone, but very different.
Okay, you go it first this time.
I guess when I was making this, I saw the figure as being youthful, maybe not having things quite figured out yet and still being timid. There's all three of the flowers here, and the flower bud and the fern unfurling are about the youthfulness. There's still a lot coming ahead for this person in their life. And the bowl, what can the bowl contain? The bowl can contain anything. There's a lot of possibility here for this young person. The nest on her head is like a hat. It's a decoration, sort of a vanity. I was thinking of how a young person will accessorize to portray a certain image, to make themselves look cute or pretty or to fit in. Then we have some warning signs here. Here's the barcode, which I brought up before as black and white thinking. It can also represent commercialization. A lot of people, and youth especially, really buy into the commercial trends. What is today's must-have item? They feel like they're not okay if they're not a part of it. And we've got the locusts here, which consume things. There are quite a few locusts in this piece. They're among the things poised to create harm for the opening possibility in this individual. And here's the broken egg, the truth that's already been damaged. I guess for me, there's the sense that this figure is young, but moving into adulthood. As we grow, we become more and more harmed. How we respond to each other without creating more harm has to do with how we process the harm we've received. This has been happening for her, and she sometimes hasn't had the capacity to work with that, though she does have the full egg in here, which is hopeful.
So I knew that for me, the name is indicative. The name is Miss Mouse, which I understand especially as being about opening possibility. If I go to my native language, Tigrinya, there is saying, Na'ay ninchwa abloota. The mouse is ridiculing the person who has trapped it and says, don't dare to put me in a leather bag. What it means is, don't try to arrest me or shut me up. The mouse is saying, if you think you will trap me by putting me in a leather bag, you're wrong. I love the bag. Leather is delicious. I will devour the trap you set me in. So for me, the mouse demonstrates self-confidence. There is nothing after all that you can do to shut me up. At the end of the day, there is no closing me down. The self is going to be free. Justice is gonna come.
That is so strong. I like that. I didn't know Miss Mouse had that tenacity. and here it's her main identifying symbol, and now I know her better. The last one is the breadwinner.
Breadwinner is a common term. In America, it's said you go out and you earn money and bring the bread to your family. But you don't bring only food to your family. You bring justice too. Your children cannot eat only food. Justice is what happens when you do the justice work within yourself. Call it shadow work, call it love work. Once you do that work, you bring it to your home, your family. Then you are a breadwinner. Justice is as sustaining as the food we consume, the oxygen we breathe in everyday ordinary life. So I don't look at the breadwinner from strict food perspective. Many people burn out because they diminished ordinary life by being focused on bringing only food to the house.
That's very insightful. I think you're way ahead from where I was when I made this piece. I was thinking about the expectation put on men, which is bought into as part of masculine identity, that men should be breadwinners. That is both a source of stress and a source of pride. Being a capable breadwinner is a way that many men nurture their family. It can be their way of showing their family that they care, but it can also be damaging. It feeds the patriarchal model. Rather than balance between men and women in the family, it constrains both the male role and the female role, regardless of skills, interests, and abilities. It can encourage domestic violence, and I think there's a certain amount of violence that is endured by men in this role as well, in what they have to suppress, in the way they need to come down hard on themselves within themselves in order to assume the demands of this role. There is a violence to male children as they are raised into this role. For example, don't show your feelings, don't cry, be tough. In the breadwinner symbols in this artwork, he has the ring for faithfulness and fidelity. There's also the gun, which represents the role in protecting the family. Often this figure is also the enforcer of the family rules. There's the bacon. He's got to bring home the bacon. There's the safety pin, which is like a quick fix for things that gets by, but doesn't repair the damage. This domino is a bit of a black and white thinking, dualistic thinking, such as in the dualistic role of male and female in the family. There's also the nest representing the home, a place to nurture family. The nest is here, it's important to him, but it's also sideways because sometimes the mindset can too rigidly define everybody's roles and actually upend the safety of the family members. But there's also the nourishment of the bread, the fish. Here we have a lemon. Lemons make lemonade, a symbol of taking what you've got and making it into something good, a symbol of resilience. In restorative justice work, it's important to both see what is causing harm and also not condemn the person. People's actions always fulfill a kind of need, and it's important to look at what influences behavior with compassion and to be open to the goodwill within someone, while at the same time working with the more challenging aspects of people's beliefs, behaviors, and actions.
I think we opened a lot of discussion points when it comes to justice within, and we invite our listeners to contemplate and share your thoughts with us. Kim's Opening the Door artwork can be viewed on YouTube channel or on the podcast page of this episode at justiceconversation.org.
Yes, in our next episode, we can talk about justice within the family and school, but I haven't done a whole body of artwork on that one. Until next time. This podcast has been produced by Philippos Helmichael and Kim Vander Heiden for the Justice Conversation Project, all rights reserved.
We encourage sharing this information in educational setting for the purpose having more conversation about justice, love, and unlocking our interrelationship with each other.
Join us for more podcasts on justiceconversation.com.